Hey folks, this is No Huddle Fantasy Sports, and we are talking NFL Week 12 DFS Core Plays for both DraftKings and FanDuel. It is late into Saturday evening, but we are here grinding, putting together the best collection of players, the best core players that you can go ahead and build your lineups around confidently tomorrow in DFS on main slates. And hey, it's pretty simple for you. All you have to do is listen up because I'm giving you the best players. I'm giving you the core players. I'm laying out the blueprint so you can build successful, profitable lineups tomorrow, DFS, DraftKings, FanDuel, main slate. All you have to do, sit back, relax, and listen up. Hey guys, and welcome back to No Huddle Fantasy Sports, and welcome to Week 12 NFL. And hey, we already got good news for Week 12 because you've taken the time to click on this video. You've taken the right step, the first step in the right direction for this weekend's DFS main slate. Because in this video, we're talking about core players, guys that you can build your lineups confidently around to make sure you are profitable and have a winning lineup in DFS. With step one out of the way, I encourage you to take the second step here and simply make sure you are subscribed to this channel. Make sure you are subscribed to No Huddle Fantasy Sports and give this video a like. Of course, if you have any comments, any guys that you suggest we should include in lineups this weekend, any core players that I may have missed, go ahead and leave a comment down below. With that said, thank you for taking the time to find this channel and click on this video. As I mentioned, I'm not going to let you down. We're going to talk about the guys that you need to have in your lineups. But before we do that, let's take a quick look, a recap of Week 11. I always like to remain transparent on this channel, talk about guys that I included in my core plays and how that played out for me. So you can see here, my top three guys all paid off in terms of ownership. DJ Moore, Josh Jacobs, and Jameis Winston were my top three, nearly all of them 50% or more. All those guys got the green light. All of them did well, even Jameis Winston. And I'm not going to lie, I was sweating that out because he had like one fantasy point at halftime. Moving on down the list here, Devin Singletary was just a total bust for me. Ross Dwelley included him at tight end as a value play against the Arizona Cardinals. Of course, he scored touchdowns. He scored 2 touchdowns, so big payoff there for a super value. But then I had Kyle Allen as my second quarterback. He did not really that good, even for his price. Chris Godwin did not really pay off for his price. Mohamed Sanu, I believe, got injured, so he really struggled. Tyler Boyd, I also think he got injured, completely red on my board. Tevin Coleman, another guy I thought was in a smash spot, just not getting it done when he has the opportunity to be that lead back. Ezekiel Elliott, another guy I owned heavily. He paid off really well. And then finally, down the board there, you can see Mark Andrews, another guy, another tight end I recommended. Also a good spot, a smash spot for him. He scored a touchdown and had a number of receptions and yards. So overall, a decent Week 11. Not my best week. We're coming off a really high, really good Week 10. And of course, you have a little bit of a down week here in Week 11. Just didn't have the right combination to really take anything down. Of course, here are my top 5 lineups for the week. You can see 161 points was my top lineup. That, of course, was with a guy that was in my other considerations, which is Lamar Jackson. But nonetheless, still a couple of good lineups here, some of them with Jameis Winston, even one cash with Kyle Allen, so it can be done. But as I mentioned, just an overall decent week. But of course, I hate wasting time. This, of course, is the No Huddle Fantasy Sports channel. So let's just quickly jump into the quarterback position. The two guys I'm looking at, Russell Wilson for Seattle, Jameis Winston for Tampa Bay. Russell Wilson, of course, is the man this year in MVP consideration, if not the lead dog for that. He's coming in 6,800 on DraftKings, 8,200 on FanDuel. He's an away underdog at Philadelphia with a 48-point over-under, so a decent but not super high over-under, but it should be a close game with a 0.1. As I mentioned, he's an underdog getting 1 point, so a really close spread there. But overall, it's just Russell Wilson. There's not a lot that needs to be said here. He's a quality, good quarterback week in and week out. He offers a decent floor with his ability to rush the ball. He has scored a few touchdowns on the ground already this season, but the big thing with him is efficiency. He throws in games that they want to run the ball, of course, but in games that he does throw the ball, he has a super high efficiency. He completes a lot of passes. He scores a lot of touchdowns when he actually throws the ball. People have said for years that he can't sustain that, but he continues to do that. This game script, I think, plays in that favor. So I don't think they're going to be able to rush the ball against Philadelphia. Philadelphia is a bit of a pass funnel type of defense. They cannot guard outside receivers. They really struggle against them, but they can defend the run pretty well. So I think as an underdog, I believe Seattle is going to struggle running the ball, resulting in Russell Wilson, of course, having to pass more. With that high efficiency mark, plus the ability or more volume in the passing game. I think that equals big things for Russell Wilson this week. I love Russell Wilson as my number one quarterback this week. And I do got to go back to my guy this week, and that's Jameis Winston for Tampa Bay. Played him last week, was biting nails. I already mentioned it at halftime. Dude had like 10 interceptions, no yards, very few points. I was really looking down on my lineups, but he did come back, broke that 300-yard bonus mark for DraftKings, threw a couple scores. Actually, after an awful Week 11 first half, I still think he managed overall 313 yards, 2 touchdowns, and scored 19 on FanDuel and 22 fantasy points on DraftKings. So put together still a great game in just only one half of football. They throw the ball so much. He had 50-plus attempts. There's a ton of volume coming through the air. But this week, he's 6,200, 7,600 on FanDuel. He's an away underdog in the Dome in Atlanta. Always got to like that. Huge total at 52, and it's going to be a close game at +3. I mentioned he's an underdog at +3.5. So I think this could potentially be a shootout. He scored, like I mentioned, he continues to put up yards and points regardless of his actual play at quarterback. He's been turning the ball over a lot, but we don't care about that. He has scored at least 22 fantasy points over the last 3 games. Even last week, I mentioned he struggled but still found a way. He's a 300-yard week in and week out bonus machine. And Atlanta themselves, they're not the greatest defense. They've played better. I'll give them that over the last couple of weeks against the pass. I think they've switched their D coordinator, or at least who's responsible for their defense of assignments right now. But nonetheless, they're still the Atlanta Falcons. They're allowing 260 passing yards a game and 21 plus fantasy points per game to the quarterback position. All right in the range of what Winston can give you. I like him, especially on DraftKings at that 6,200 price tag. Moving on to the running back position this week. Man, it is a mess. I really struggled putting together just this 4-point list, kind of giving you a value play at the end here. But in my opinion this week, if you can pay for the guys that have the names, your McCaffreys, your Kamaras, go with those guys. Be safe, because it is a little bit of a crapshoot this week. There's not a lot of value, and that value that people are talking about existing, who really knows what's going to happen way down the price range there. But my first guy here is Derrick Henry for Tennessee, playing at home against Jacksonville. Really, he just checks the boxes I look for a running back week in and week out, especially in DFS, meaning he's a home running back who is favored and he gets volume against a pretty weak, especially over the last couple of weeks, Jacksonville Jaguars defense. Jacksonville right now giving up 113 rushing yards per game average. That's coming out to anywhere from 24 to 27 fantasy points per game surrendered to the running back position. Just a weak defense overall. But the big number I have listed here is they're giving up 5.3 yards per carry, which is the worst mark in the NFL. Basically, guys are getting 5 yards every single time they touch the ball against this defense. And that number, if you actually go back to the last 3 games, is even higher. I believe that bumps up to 6.3 yards per carry over their last 3 games against running backs. Basically, if you look back, and I've done this, if any running back that gets double-digit carries, I actually think it's 12 or more carries, will break that 100-yard mark. And basically, you know that's Derrick Henry. He's not a big guy for the pass game, but he gets a ton of carries. I think he can easily exceed that 100-yard mark. He's a home back favorite against a weak run defense, solid price. He gets the volume. He's top 10 in rush attempts this year. I like Derrick Henry at home against Jacksonville this week. Next up is a pretty simple play just based on numbers this week, and that's Nick Chubb for Cleveland. I really don't like playing Cleveland players because I believe Nick Chubb's their best player, their best offensive player. I believe it's Nick Chubb, and they just underutilize him at the worst times. But nonetheless, he's in a great spot. Cleveland's in a good spot this week. The big thing here is Hunt has come back, Kareem Hunt, but it's not affected actually Nick Chubb's usage. He's still getting the carries. It's just a little bit different of a role, especially in the pass game. But I don't care this week because they're playing Miami at home. Again, another guy that's checking those boxes. He's a huge home favorite running back, playing a very weak defense at home. Miami specifically, a top 5 matchup for running backs, giving up 128 plus rushing yards a game. That's number 1 in the NFL, or otherwise it's the worst mark in the NFL. They're giving up a ton of yards, 25 to 28 fantasy points per game to running backs each and every week. Again, pretty simple play. He's a good back. I think an elite back, home favorite, weak defense, all the boxes checked. Go smart here, go Nick Chubb. Moving on, I have Alvin Kamara for New Orleans listed here, and we're not going by price because he's obviously more expensive than Nick Chubb, but I did struggle a little bit trying to fit in a third guy here. Alvin Kamara landed on my list. I think he's a safe play. Again, I don't want to veer off of the safe plays at running back this week. I think there's too much up and down outside of these guys I'm mentioning, But Alvin Kamara in a great spot. He's decently expensive on both sides, but he's starting to come back into form after his injury. We saw him get 13 rushes and 10 receptions in week 11. So really, you're getting 23 touches out of what I think is another elite back, and half of those are receptions. So especially on DraftKings, where you get that point per reception, just a great all-around spot against Carolina, a team that is really known for their defense in the past, but has really struggled this year on all accounts. But lately has been a really funnel defense or run funnel defense, meaning teams have been able to really run the ball against them. Carolina's a top 10 or a top 5 defense versus position matchup for Alvin Kamara for the New Orleans backs. In fact, they've given up 18 total rushing touchdowns this year, which is the most in the NFL. Again, he's a receiving back mostly, but nonetheless still in an elite spot in the backfield as a running back this week. I like Alvin Kamara as a safe play for New Orleans. And finally, my last guy listed here, my somewhat of a value play. I think a lot of people are on him, unfortunately, but that's Bo Scarborough for Detroit. Came into action last week for Detroit. A lot of people on Ty Johnson. Then they went, I think, McKissick after that. Didn't really know how that backfield would turn out. I turned on the game last week. This guy was running like a monster. He looked like vintage Marshawn Lynch. Didn't get a ton of carries, but still nonetheless had an excellent game last week. I liked what I saw out of him. If I'm Detroit, this is the back I'm playing. It's a little bit of a gamble here, but again, he looked like the best back for Detroit. Some type of physical back that they've been missing, especially with Stafford out. They need a guy like this. I like him for week 12 against Washington, who's giving up a ton of yards. Another very weak run defense. 113 plus yards average on the ground given up by that defense. You're looking at 25 to 28 fantasy points per game on average to running back position. I like Bo Scarborough as my value running back. I'm going to be getting a lot of exposure to him over a lot of other guys that are down in that price range. All right, quickly moving on to the wide receiver position here. I love receivers this week. I'm looking to try to save elsewhere, save at other positions, and try to fit in these stud receivers because, number one here, I love Julio Jones for Atlanta. Really like anybody for Atlanta that's playing wide out that basically suits up, but I really like Julio Jones. We all know who he is. He's in a juicy dream matchup versus Tampa Bay. He has a good history against Tampa Bay. Also, just to add to that, I believe he has several 25-plus fantasy point games against Tampa Bay. So again, a good history against them. But overall, we're talking about a game that is the highest over-under total shootout. I talked about Winston in that game. This game is just going to be all good news for fantasy football. Tampa Bay's defense is terrible against the pass. They've really been what I would call rounding into form, which is what we expected them to be very, very bad in their secondary. They simply cannot stop receivers. They're number one in the NFL for fantasy points given up to receivers, and they give up nearly, I think, number 2 in the NFL. They're giving up 15-plus receptions to receivers each and every week. Again, just an elite spot. And if you look back, when they've played, when Tampa Bay's secondary has played elite receivers, they have just been dominated by those types of receivers. So I love Julio Jones. Just find the money and pay up for him. Another guy you're going to have to find some cash for here is Mike Evans for Tampa Bay. Just coming right back to that same game. Similar reasons. Tampa Bay, Atlanta, looking like a shootout. 52 over under. Just lots and lots of juice. Lots of fantasy points to go around. Mike Evans in a great spot with pairing with Jameis Winston. I already talked about Winston. He's throwing the ball 50 plus times a game. That ball is in the air all game long for Tampa Bay. They always seem to be trailing. And so obviously the receivers are great plays. We've obviously seen good things from Mike Evans this year. He's one of the best receivers in the game. He's a top 5 receiver overall, fantasy-wise, regular-wise, whatever you want to call it. And he's also playing with, of course, Chris Godwin, who's also a good inside receiver. If I had to pick, though, I'm going Mike Evans this week for Tampa Bay. Atlanta secondary is weak overall, but especially weak against wide receiver ones. Mike Evans, great spot this week. Again, you got to find the money, but I believe paying up for him is the right deal here. Next up here, I have DK Metcalf for Seattle. He is my favorite receiver to pair with Russell Wilson this week. He's actually one of my favorite receivers overall. I think he's a great price on both sites. And if you're talking about his matchup, we got Philadelphia. Each and every week I talk about how outside receivers are just dominating that secondary. Philadelphia simply cannot guard outside receivers. DK Metcalf obviously is an outside receiver. He's playing 85+% of his snaps at the outside receiver position. So he's in a good spot this week. I think he's the best best spot, best value for that Seattle wide receiver core. He's getting a ton of red zone targets. You're talking about 13 red zone targets on the year. I believe that's top 10. He only has 2 receptions. Both of those are touchdowns. So in a way, you could expect if he's going to continue to get that volume, especially around the red zone, we got some positive touchdown regression coming his way. I love DK Metcalf this week for Seattle. And finally here, a guy you can save a little bit of money on, Devontae Parker for Miami. Talked about him over the last couple of weeks, turning into a really good receiver for Miami, even though they have no one else to play football with. But since they've basically employed and allowed Fitzpatrick to take over under center and just continue to play him out, he has actually found Devontae Parker more often than not. He remains a solid value, 5,200 on DraftKings, 6,000 on FanDuel. He's had no fewer than 11 fantasy points since week 4. I personally avoided him last week because of a matchup, and it still didn't matter. He had 7 receptions for 135 yards. Great things. He's had 26 targets over the last 3 weeks, so he's getting targeted a lot. This includes he's had 10 targets 2 games in a row over the last 2 games. So again, good things here. He's getting targeted a lot. We love that opportunity in fantasy, and his price is great on both sites. You got to like Devontae Parker to help you round out your lineups. Typically, tight end is the hardest position to predict week in and week out. Nobody likes to roster tight ends. They're hard to figure out. They're expensive at times when you got to pay for the Kelce's and the more expensive guys. But this week is just an absolute dumpster fire. It's garbage. Everybody's either hurt or on a bye. We're talking about guys missing like Ingram, Hooper, guys like Kelce on a bye. It's just the only guy that's really expensive and has a name is Zach Ertz, who I would, recommend if you want to pay up. But nonetheless, I think he's still a safer play at tight end. If you're looking for one, pay up, I guess, if that's the right word. He's only 6,000 and 6,100 on FanDuel, but he's the most expensive tight end. You're talking about 22 targets over the last couple of games. He hasn't been very good this year. He hasn't been targeted a lot. There's been a lot of, but it seems like he's coming more into the old Zach Ertz over the last couple of games, getting those targets. He should maintain high volume with all the injuries they have on their offense and at wide receiver. So I expect that should continue, but we don't really know just based upon how the season's played out so far. And then Seattle themselves are a top 10 matchup according to defense versus position, the tight end position. So all year long, I've targeted tight ends against them when I can. I think it's a good spot for him if you have the money to pay up. But I think this is a place, tight end is where you can really save money this week. My guy, the guy I'm probably going to have the most of, I'm going to ride or die by him, Vance McDonald for Pittsburgh. Nearly minimum on DraftKings. A little bit more in FanDuel, so maybe not quite the case. Maybe just pay up for Ertz. His target volume should increase. Juju Smith-Schuster and Deontay Johnson, the number 1 and number 2 receivers, getting almost murdered by Cleveland last week. So McDonald at times was lining up at receiver. They have no one else. It's James Washington and him at receiver. Vance McDonald is in a good spot to capitalize on that extra opportunity, extra volume. We've seen him get 7 targets, literally 7-7-7 over the last 3 games. Maybe we get 10 targets this week. But again, for that $3,500 price tag, if he gets a score, he blows past value. So I think he's in a good spot. I think with the opportunity, and on top of all of that, Pro Football Focus has him as the main slate's best matchup grade. So he's in a good spot overall too in terms of matchup. You gotta go with what your gut here, and my gut's saying pay way down, pay for Vance McDonald. He's in an opportunity to pay off that super low price tag. All right, so that wraps up the core plays, guys that I think you can't avoid, you should be including in your lineups. But of course, there's a number of other plays. I'm not suggesting you shouldn't play Matt Ryan this week. I will have a little bit of ownership to him. He's a guy I've highlighted here. A lot of people are going to play him. I'm a GPP guy. If I think that's going to happen, at times this hurts me, but I try to go against the grain. I'm going with Russell Wilson over Matt Ryan, but Matt Ryan's certainly in a great spot. I love Calvin Ridley. I have him marked here. I love Julio Jones, so naturally Matt Ryan fits. Benny Snell Jr., I talked about a couple of Pittsburgh guys, or I guess I talked about Vance McDonald. Jalen Samuels is the guy right below him. I'm suggesting both these guys are in play. With Benny Snell Jr., much cheaper, and with an opportunity, he's the best running back they have right now. It's not Jalen Samuels. Jalen Samuels is a tight end that catches the ball out of the backfield. Benny Snell Jr. he was drafted this past year as a backup running back. He's a decent runner. He was in college. if he gets 10, maybe 12, maybe 15 carries versus this very bad Cincinnati defense, who knows what could happen. But again, it's a little bit of a crapshoot here. I think he's the best back for Pittsburgh in an elite matchup. Just consider that. Michael Thomas, don't really have to mention much about him. Just play him when you can. He's in a great spot week in and week out, again this week. Calvin Ridley, throw in everybody from that game. And then finally here, DJ Moore, turn into a really good player for Carolina. Arguably the best receiver they have right now, right? But certainly has a relationship with Kyle Allen, getting targets after targets week after week. So I really like DJ Moore this week for Carolina. Okay, guys, that wraps up the show. That wraps up this video. These are your core plays. These are guys I believe I will be personally building my lineups around. There's no question about that. You know they'll be in my lineups. They're guys I've vetted, guys I've done the research on. I believe if you build around these guys, you will be successful this week, Week 12, NFL DFS. You can trust that I've done the research and I've put the time in, and you can be confident in these plays. And there should be a link popping up above. That's my previous video for the week. It's still relevant. It's defense versus position, top 5 players at every position in terms of matchup data. It's very useful, especially for DFS and helping paint the picture, figure out where you should go with teams, offenses, stacks, stuff like that. I also, in that video, in the description, include full-blown every position cheat sheets in terms of which defenses give up the most amount of points. So again, all useful information. I've done it all. It's free to you guys. Nothing you got to do but watch the video or click the link in the description. And finally here, thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you for finding this channel, sticking with me. If you're a subscriber, welcome back. Thanks for sticking with me here. I hope you're winning just like we are on this channel. And if you're new here and haven't done so already, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Each and every week I put out these videos. I'm committed to you guys. I'm committed to winning and making sure we put together the best lineups, both season long and DFS. It's all relevant here. And of course, leave a comment down below if you have any other recommendations, any other plays I might have missed, or if any of this information I've given, it can be wrong. It's DFS. Things happen. We're not going to hit every single week, and we're certainly not going to hit every single play. So let me know. Let's get a discussion going. And of course, if you benefit from this video, give it a thumbs up. Again, make sure you're subscribed, and I will see you in the next video, and hopefully see you tomorrow at the top of the leaderboards.